Hey everybody, so I promised you a video tour of my favorite notebooks, and I actually just dug them out of the top shelf of my closet, and I spent a few minutes going through all of them before I thought to share them with you. This is my assistant on camera today, Gerard. Um, he is a very curious kitty, and so I think he might hang out here for the whole of our session. We'll see how long that lasts. It depends on if my dog comes flying up the stairs or not. Anyway, I thought I would take a few minutes to share some examples of diaries and journals um, that I enjoy revisiting from time to time. And more importantly, I thought we could talk a little bit about how to use things like this in the classroom to inspire kids to do specific kinds of writing. So, although I know that a lot of this course is focused on structured notebooks and aligning your notebook structure to the different experiences that happen in your classrooms, I know that a lot of teachers like kids to keep journals separately that are kept day to day and that allow kids to record either their reflections about their experiences, or sometimes they function more like a diary or recording of daily events. I also sometimes like to create a section inside of my notebook where kids can do micro writing and they can write short pieces either in response to a prompt, and I've included some of those in this course, or in response to what they're discovering about what other writers do with notebooks. And so this video is going to expose you to some of the diaries and journals of other writers, including myself. And it's also going to maybe sort of inspire you to talk with your kids about investigating the work of other diary keepers, journal keepers, and notebook keepers. You'll see a set of slides that also accompanies this video with some additional recommendations in it. One of the first things that I like to do when I'm working with journal writers and notebook keepers and diary keepers is I like to show them these. These are the diaries that I kept when I was 11, 12, and 13 years old. You can tell by the really fresh stickers that are all over them. And although I don't necessarily share all of the pages in these diaries because they're a hoot, I like to find some entries that I'm willing to share and that are a little bit diverse. For instance, on July 7th, 1983, Dear Diary, hi, today was okay. I went to my friend Diane's house for most of the day. She's pretty. I hope that we get to spend more time together. She said that someday maybe we can go to Fantasy Island together. I hope I don't get sick on the rides. That's just one entry about someone who actually became one of my good friends. There's another entry in here as well. Dear Diary, hi. Today I got 3 pairs of Zeppelin cords and 2 pairs of shorts and a mahogany pair of shoes, and I got 2 pairs of runners and 1 white pair of shorts. I got another pair of shorts that are red and purple and white. And I go on and on and on about all of these shorts that I bought. But over on the next page, Dear Diary, today we went to Shirkston. I loved riding on the waves and I loved climbing on the very, very tall sand dunes. People there had a dune buggy. I enjoyed it. Sometimes I will share entries like these to show kids that I kept a diary every single day when I was a kid. And these are the paper diaries that I made for myself after this one got filled up. This was the very first diary that anyone ever bought me. My father bought it for me. And it actually, if you take a look at it, it has enough space. It's a 5-year diary, and there's spaces for every single year for recordings on the same day. Kids usually think that's kind of cool. And sometimes I'll go through and I'll find entries in here to read to them because this was the very first one that I owned. It used to have a lock on it, but as you can see, my little sister busted it off so that she could snoop when we were kids. And these are just like the stories we tell about diary keeping. And it's really It's really motivating for kids to see that. My father bought me this diary on February 14th, 1981, and I kept it for years and years and years. And I went back and did the 5-year entries. There's even a note, an old school note in here that I apparently needed to give to my friend and didn't. It's been a blast going back through these today. This is a diary that I kept when I was in college. It still has my prom picture in it from my junior year. And there are some entries in here that are really revealing. I have my GPA recorded in the back for my sophomore year, and all of the different clubs that I belong to are listed here as well. Most of these entries reflect the stress that I was feeling when I was in college. Some of them also are reflections on how I was negotiating growing up and leaving my house and becoming an adult who no longer lived at home. It's interesting to read these now. Thanksgiving break starts Friday and I can't wait. I plan to go to the game with my friend Lene. Tonight, Kim and I are going to the movies, and Tammy is coming up on Sunday to see me. It's really strange trying to mix friends together from high school and college, and I go on that way. And there are entries here that I could show my students that really reflect, all of that I was grappling with when I was in college and trying to move from one life into another. Here, this entire journal is from the year that I began my first teaching job. And it also is the first year that I was dating my husband. And what I found really interesting, which was kind of cool, and I will point this out to kids next time I work with them, is most of these diaries either begin or end on August 16th. And that just happens to be my wedding anniversary now, which is kind of cool. Anyway, this diary has some really interesting things in it that I want to show my kids, including pictures of me from when I was 21. Which is exactly how old my daughter is right now. That was the first year that I was teaching. In fact, I got these headshots taken to be included with my resume. Why am I showing you all of my diaries? Because I'm going to encourage you, if you were ever a diary keeper, to share yours with your students. This is one way that kids start to see us as more human. And especially if you can read entries that kind of portray you as a little bit flawed or a little bit silly. It also shows kids just how real notebooks look. They're not perfectly kept. And sometimes, there are whole sections that I skipped, or where there's only 1 or 2 words. This was the day that my father used to breed dogs, and I had a puppy for a little while until it got placed in a home. And all that it says on this day is, today was the day that the puppy left. The puppy was sold and went to live with its owner, and I really didn't need to write anything else because that was a heartbreaking day for me, and I can still remember it. Flipping through our diaries and reflecting on how we used to write at different stages in our life, showing them to our students, even using them in ways that help kids see how we can give each other feedback or get ideas from each other's entries. It's a really cool thing. Sometimes I'll pull an entry from my own journal or diary, and I'll ask kids to talk with me about how I might rewrite it or how I could have written it better then in order to capture that moment better, because as you can imagine, there are some really bad entries in here. But it's really rewarding always to share these with my kids, and they're always so excited to see what I was writing about at their age, or the photographs that I tucked in there. And I don't look at these that often, maybe once or twice a year at the most. And I always notice something different about them when I return to them, which leads me to say this. If you haven't kept notebooks yet yourself, start doing that. Because life is short, and one of the most rewarding things that I'm noticing about going back and looking at all of these is how great it was. Even though sometimes when I was capturing it, it sure didn't feel like it. It's interesting to go back and reflect, and to do that with kids as well. I also have this whole pile of mentor texts here. There are some different titles, which I will list in a separate document for you. Each of these is written from a very different and diverse perspective, but all of them our diaries, and we can use them as mentor texts with writers. One of my favorite things to do is to distribute books like these across the room. Put kids in groups and give them the opportunity to do a random dip into the diary. So a random diary dip. And that's what I did for you. I grabbed every single one of them. I opened it to a page, and I asked myself, what was the writer doing as a journal keeper or a notebook keeper or a diary keeper on this particular page? And so on this one, this is actually called Dear Nobody, The True Diary of Mary Rose. And this is the true story of a high school girl who suffered from the weight of a secret that she was keeping, from being bullied, and also from her own physical ailments and illnesses as well. She struggled with addiction in addition to that. But when I flipped this open, it's an interesting entry. Let me read a piece of it. Dear Nobody. Okay, we went down to the Lilith Fair and it ended up being sold out. I was in such a miserable mood. Seeing all those other girls with their friends made me sad. I don't have any friends, not here. I felt miserable and like a loser and everything people who have no friends feel like. At least I had my mom. And if I were to ask myself, as a notebook keeper, what is this writer doing in her diary that I could mimic? One of the things that I might focus on is the fact that she shared a really negative experience, but she ended it with a hopeful line or a line of gratitude. And I'm wondering if that's something that I might, try myself as a notebook keeper and encourage kids to do. I also like this. She includes letters in her diary that she's received from other people. And of course the address is blacked out and everything, but that's a cool idea too. And so this is one strategy we could learn from this example, from this mentor text. Another one is the very popular series, The Dork Diaries, and you can use Diary of a Wimpy Kid as well. And regardless of the age of our notebook or diary keepers, there's inspiration that we can get. So when I did a real quick dip into this book, the first thing that I noticed were the visuals on this page. And so what the speaker's writing about is, this is so not me. And giving a little bit of an illustration of a typical teenager or how she views typical teenagers. And instead, my life totally sucks. All day, I wandered around my new school like a zombie in lip gloss, and not a single person bothered to say hi. This is me, yawning. Most of the time, I feel invisible. And if I were to ask myself what the writer's doing on this page, one thing, there's a lot that we could focus on, is the incorporation of visuals inside of a diary, which makes this mentor text a little bit different from others. Here, very popular one, the Freedom Writer's Diary. The page that I flipped open to, this is a little bit of a longer excerpt, but it's very interesting. Dear Diary, my mom always told me that one person can make a difference that can change the whole world. It sounds unbelievable to me that one person can be a catalyst for such a change. She also told me that when she was young, during the 60s, there were many men and women that made significant changes that affected her life as well as the world around her. Rosa Parks was one of those incredible people that changed the world. And this writer goes on to describe Rosa Parks' impact on history. And if I were to ask myself as a diary keeper, what is this person doing? She's pulling out an example from history. She's including a historical reference, a figure that she admires in her diary. And she goes on to say, hearing about Rosa Parks and her protest showed me that there is hope for me and all students in Miss G's classes to truly be catalysts for change. Imagine if there were 150 Rosa Parks standing up for tolerance. What a difference we would make. And this is an interesting strategy as well that can inspire journal keepers, diary keepers, our notebook keepers, identifying someone in history that inspires us or that we can learn from. Very, very powerful. This book by Dodie Smith, I actually haven't started reading it just yet. I picked it up this week because I'm home on vacation for the next 2 weeks. And this came highly recommended to me by a friend. So I literally flagged the first page because I don't have a context for the rest of the book. But listen to this. I write this sitting in the kitchen sink. That is, my feet are in it. The rest of me is on the draining board, which I have padded with our dog's blanket and the tea cozy. I can't say that I am really comfortable, and there is a depressing smell of carbolic soap, but this is the only part of the kitchen where there is any daylight left. And I have found that sitting in a place where you never have sat before can be inspiring. I wrote my very best poem while sitting in the hen house. Though even that isn't a very good poem, I have decided that my poetry is so bad that I mustn't write any of it. The writer is describing where she is sitting as she's beginning her entry, her diary entry. Very neat approach that others might be inspired by. Another very famous book, Go Ask Alice, The Anonymous Diary of a Girl Who Struggles and Eventually Dies from Addiction. And I just did a dip into this one. April 24th. The kids have really started harassing me. Twice today, Jan banged into me in the hall and called me Nancy Nice and Mary Pure, but I've had it. I really have had it this time. If I begin to feel too low, I'm just going to ask Mom and Dad to transfer me to another school. But the problem is, where could I go that somebody would not find out about me? And how could I tell Mom and Dad everything so they'd let me change schools? Oh, I really don't know that they'd let me. And I really don't know what I'm going to do. I've even started praying every night like I used to when I was little. But now I'm not just saying words. I'm begging. I'm pleading. Good night, diary. And that's a really heavy entry, which could lead to some conversation about writing about tough stuff inside of our notebooks and our journals, and how those can be places where we can reflect on the things that are troubling us most. And as you can see, she's trying to brainstorm some solutions as well, and thinking that through and processing it. Jay's journal, which again, I have not read this one. I read Go Ask Alice. This one I'm not familiar with, but it was recommended to me as well by the woman who runs the young adult section of our bookstore. Brad has always wanted to do something mechanical, be an engineer, own a garage, race cars, fly planes, whatever, but at least he knows in which direction he's going. Dell, well, he's more like me. I'm not sure his parents can afford to send him to college, though. His old man is just a carpenter. Dell wants more, but who the hell knows what the future is going to bring? And that isn't right. I must be more precise in my writing as well as my thinking if I'm going to get into any of the fields that I want to. One molds and makes their future, at least if they want one of any consequence. What I find very interesting here is his description of his friends and his comparison of himself to his friends. So if I were going to challenge writers to ask themselves what's going on in this particular entry, that would be it. Another famous one. The Diary of Anne Frank. Dear Kitty, Friday, September 25th, 1942. Yesterday evening I went upstairs and visited the Van Dans. I do so occasionally to have a chat. Sometimes it can be quite fun. Then we have some moth biscuits. The biscuit tin is kept in the wardrobe, which is full of mothballs, and drink lemonade. We talked about Peter. I told them how Peter often strokes my cheek and that I wished he wouldn't, as I don't like being pawed by boys. What the writer is doing here is revealing very strong feelings and also allowing us to see into the strength of her character, even though she's very young. And it could inspire other writers to write things that reveal things about themselves and help to define them as characters as well. David Sedaris, one of my favorites. Oh, this is so good. December 28th, 1983, Raleigh. This was my last night at the IHOP. I've been going steadily since 1979, just drinking coffee and reading. On my way out tonight, I said goodbye to my waitress and left a $2 tip. I didn't cry, though I worried that I might. A very small moment that seems insignificant, that he blew up into a very significant moment. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs, which is a very powerful book. Such were the unusually fortunate circumstances of my early childhood. When I was 6 years old, my mother died, and then for the first time I learned, by the talk around me, that I was a slave. Boom. What a powerful passage, and I really did just dip into this and find it. What blows me away about that is the potential to ask kids the question, when did you discover something shocking about yourself or your history? Where was the veil sort of peeled back and you realized or discovered something about your life or someone you love or your own circumstances that was shocking or surprising to you? Something that you could have known before, but you were too young to understand what it was. There are 1,000 other passages inside of this book that could be used as powerful mentor texts for writers. Zlata's Diary, which some of you are probably also very familiar with. Lots of different things inside of this piece. This particular piece is the true story of a little girl who grew up in Sarajevo during the war. Dear Mimi, we gave ourselves a treat today. We picked the cherries off the tree in the yard and ate them all up. We had watched it blossom and its small green fruits slowly turn red, and now here we are eating them. Oh, you are a wonderful cherry tree. A small moment like that, grounded in nature, an event in nature that's kind of annual, and also something sweet that stands in contrast to everything else that might be going on in our lives. A perfect mentor text. I will always write back how one letter changed 2 lives. This particular book, when I dipped into it, what I found so fascinating about it was this. At the end of first grade, there was a ceremony where the top 3 students were named. Number 3 was announced first, then number 2. When my name was called for number 1, I heard a joyous cry from behind me. I turned to see my mother jumping up and down like a rabbit, which is how we celebrate. I had to hold back a smile as her high-pitched cries pushed me toward the front of the crowd where I received my certificate. On our way home, my mother said, "Martin, if you want to do well in life, you must always be number 1. I was number 1 again the following year, but then in grade 3, I took 2nd place. Why didn't you take number 1, my mother asked, the day I got my report card, her face screwed so tight, her eyes were squinted slits. The other guy is very clever, I explained, handing it to her. She swatted it out of my hand with such ferocity I was startled. I watched the paper as it fluttered to the floor and kept my eyes there as she shouted, "That's no excuse. Next you'll be number 5, then number 14. You must work harder." "I will, Mai," I said, still stunned. I picked up the paper and smoothed it out on my thigh before trying to give it to her one more time. "I don't want to look at it," she said, quiet this time but still fierce. "Or you." As I turned to leave, the report crumpled in my hand, she whispered, "School is your only hope." She took a deep breath and finished her thought. "Otherwise, you will end up like me." And while your students might not have this level of experience, and some of them may, and some of them might have others that are equally powerful and perhaps painful, a lot of students have experiences that they could journal about, stories to tell that reveal their family's values and their family's expectations. These little small moment stories that are true and that are real. And so I'm going to put the list of all of these mentor texts in a document that you can link to in this file, and that I hope you'll add to as well. And that's my invitation to you. If you know of particularly children's books, because those are ones that I had a struggle looking for, that would serve as good mentor texts for diary keepers, journal keepers, notebook keepers, I invite you to add them to the Google Doc that I'm going to drop into the file. I hope that you've enjoyed this little video tour of my favorite journals. I hope that you'll share your own writing with your students if you kept a diary and held on to it. And if you didn't, I hope that you'll start to write every day to keep your own notebooks and to keep your own journals for yourself and for your kids as well.